Wow.
a logistics guy. So we have this whole kind of experience of the experience of pilgrimage. So we worship every day. We had this whole process of kind of daily reflection while you walk, and then just kind of getting the crap beat out of you the entire time in terms of just like
How many miles a day?
so it was 15 to 18, 20 to 25
Oh,
K a day.
oh,
So yeah, which is not that bad, but it's in the mountains. So it's either up or down, like and mostly up. Yeah. So the whole it's like, people ask me how Spain is. I'm like, Spain is all uphill. That's what Spain is. Because it literally, because so there's this like big plain that and on the Camino, and then kind of about where Astorga is, where we started, is kind of the beginning of the mountains. And so it's kind of this process of kind of doing this for about 4,000 feet. And then you get to the top of what's called the Mountain of Hope, which is the place you can look down into Santiago and you can see the cathedral spires, like they're twin spires. So it's just like we're there, and then you're like like all the way down. So, but the whole 180 miles going into it is all just like, or 100, whatever. The last day basically is kind of downhill. After that, it's kind of craziness.
so
We are live, Facebook world, and
Hey everyone.
we
Hey,
just
everybody.
hearing a bit from Andy, who's just returned from a great pilgrimage, which will be good fodder for our conversation today. And we're also joined by Karen out in California. And our topic this morning, as we continue this journey through Swedenborg's work, New Jerusalem, our topic this morning is piety, and its role in the spiritual life. And I thought, to get us started, I wanted to just read the first number because it kind of sums up. Some of these chapters contain a lot of different themes. This one's pretty straightforward, and the first number really sort of sums up what Swedenborg is giving us here, and then we'll open the doors wide to converse around the subject of piety, specifically in regard to what it means for the new church to descend inside and out. So what is piety in relationship to how we ourselves live our lives? And also a very rich conversation topic, I think, for us is what's the role of piety in how we organize as community and as people seeking to be the new church in the world. So this first paragraph: many people think that a spiritual life, the kind of life that leads us to heaven, consists of piety, of outward holiness, and of renunciation of the world. In fact, though, piety without caring, outward holiness without inner holiness, and renunciation of the world without involvement in the world do not make our life spiritual. What does make our life spiritual is piety that comes from a caring heart, outward holiness that is a manifestation of inner holiness, and renunciation of the world that goes along with involvement in the world. So what do you guys think? Where would you like to start today on this subject? How do we live in the world and out of the world? How do we maintain inner holiness and express outer holiness? Who would like to jump in first?
I'll go ahead and put my toe in the water.
Okay.
I was reflecting this morning on the number of times that I have had the probably common experience where you're rereading something, maybe only for the second time, maybe for the 20th time, maybe rereading it very soon after reading it originally, or a long time. And you see something that jumps out off the page at you that you never saw before. I swear I never saw it before.
Mm-hmm.
And this has been running through my head since I started reading this. The idea that doing good and truth is loving the Lord and the neighbor. And that when we're doing that, we are involved in a life of usefulness. So piety is doing it.
Mm-hmm.
for me. I'm so thankful to have rediscovered that. It's become sort of my mantra in the last few weeks.
I can see it kind of touching your heart a little bit. Does it resonate with a particular experience or situation?
You know, we journey through the changes, and just recently I've been doing a lot of work on my own sense of self-worth. And it's really, I'm very thankful. So thanks for doing this, Sage.
That's beautiful. It's beautiful. It's the doing it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I
that
mean,
mean to you, Andy?
I really appreciate that, having, because we were just where our conversation picked up, where we were kind of reflecting before we started, was just this idea of, the idea of pilgrimage is alternating feet, as George Dole would say, that there's this notion of there's no replacement for walking the trail. There's no replacement for, we have the notional idea of like, gosh, this is what it's like to walk from this place to that place. And we can look at it on a map, we can kind of, but it is the act of actually getting out and getting blisters and getting hot and getting cold and getting beat up. And that actually contains within it, that, that kind of doorway into, that avenue into where the act of piety, the doing of it, actually becomes that love to the Lord, actually becomes that, like, it's the, because the external act of, why are we doing a thing versus the when the internals and the externals kind of line up and we begin to do the thing, and that the way that really transforms us and really changes us, that it is only in the doing that we can have the experience of the love to the Lord. It's only in the doing. Like, I think that's what you're kind of getting at, Karen. It's like, we have the notional ideas, we can have warm chocolatey feelings, but at the end of the day, it is in the doing of it that we really have the true experience of what it is. But, and how and like how, like, one of the things I think we've done too is kind of load that up with like, oh, well, I just need to be helpful, or, but how much that is, I look at my pilgrimage experience, or I look at somebody, playing music for an appreciative crowd, or I look at somebody that's creating, truth, good, kind of the Plato thing, the truth, the good and the beautiful, like bringing that into being is actually wildly useful to this world. More than sweeping a floor, maybe, I think it's, there's the whole Mary and Martha conversation, like all that, like there's a real sense of identity in who we are and what we are in it, that it's not, because I always, like, and maybe it's just me, but I kind of always load that usefulness thing up with like, well, I gotta be I gotta go be helpful to the thing. Like, actually, no, I gotta be me, and I have to love the Lord, and then being me and loving the Lord will create usefulness out of, like, my piety will, my internal piety will translate to external piety, will actually result in the love of the Lord and the kingdom being built, the space for the holy city to descend in that space. I don't know, that's kind of circular maybe, but
No, not at all.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And it's making me think of that portion in the second paragraph, 124, where he talks about, well, the pious life has to be the caring life, and piety is not just thinking about God.
Yeah.
right.
And I think that's something I'm constantly sitting with and wondering about, is like, how do we, especially as leaders in the church, how do we make space where people see that connection between their doing and their thinking?
Yeah, I thought this paragraph actually had in it one of the most beautiful pieces of practical spirituality I've ever encountered. It's just this, which is just this line of, and I never have encountered it again, Karen, one of those like, yeah, I read through this before, but never, like, and only, I actually think it's only because of the way it's paginated and the way it actually lays out on the page, that if I were to read it in a different, like, I pulled this out and printed it off because I'm better with a hard copy, and just it happens to be the way that fell, that actually it spoke to me. But it says, this halfway through the paragraph, which is, he thinks indeed of God, but not from God. And what an incredible notion of transformation, I think, to think about in our practical spirituality of, just as a metric, maybe like, all right, am I thinking of God? Am I thinking like, okay, will God love me if I'm a good boy and I do all the good things? Or am I thinking of God as an object? Or am I thinking from God, the remains that God has placed in me? And am I thinking for the best I can manage, the most beautiful, the best possible thing I might be able to manage on any given moment? That am I operating out of that place in my soul, in my being, in my understanding and in my heart? Like that's practical lived spirituality at a grunt level that is I think it's one of the most incredible checks that we could use. Like if we could integrate that into our spiritual life all the time about like, all right, Andy, are you operating, from God here, or are you thinking of God, where like I'm trying to be a shiny boy and I like being like God love me, and I'm trying to be, like are you trying to win some merit here? Are you looking for another merit badge, like, or are you trying to look good in front of all the like, or are you operating out of this like, what does the situation call for me to just operate from that place where the divine speaks to me in both my heart and my understanding? Like that blew me away. I spent a bunch of time on that last night, just kind of like, wait a minute, there's something to be mined there, like as far as the gem for me.
Yeah. It's such a subtle, such a seismic, important difference, and yet so subtle.
Yeah,
and so
right.
Hard to get your head around. I was listening to someone recently who was talking about the thought that, so like the tradition of Tai Chi, that we think of it as this practice that you learn, but it very likely kind of emerged first from people who were living kind of from God, like from the spirit, just like spontaneously moving their bodies in ways
Right.
that felt good. And then others have sought to learn from that and kind of follow that, mimic that, to create that inner state. And sometimes I think about that with worship, that where we create these forms of prayer and worship and ritual to elicit that inner state. And yet somehow the inner state ultimately has to come first, so how.
Yeah. Well,
That?
I think it's an interesting thing. Like, I mean, that's because what I appreciated about this chapter is not what was in it, but what wasn't in it. Because he didn't talk about all the stuff he talks about in divine providence, about how this works. Like he talks about just this is what piety is. Like it's just a definition exercise, which, for a big brain guy like Brad or Swedenborg, like it's really like, it's a helpful discipline, I think, for us to think about, because it is this question about like, it's nearly impossible I feel like, to feel our way into new ways of thinking, but often we can think our ways into new ways of feeling. Like we can, like you can't really take Swedenborg at his word with this, because different places he says different things. Sometimes he says, the heart leads. Sometimes he says the truth leads. Like, okay, which is it, pal? But you can see, but I think it is, as again, our beloved George Dole would say, it's alternating feet. It is a truth and a love kind of journey. But so, and the only reason I ask about that is because kind of like what you were talking about, Sage, about like, given our forms, given we have these worship forms, given we have these things, and we have these things that people will show up and submit themselves to, at least a few people, what do we do? Like, how do we let how do the forms help that? Like, how do the forms facilitate that journey from, these, because he says in the beginning at 124, he says, piety consists of thinking and speaking piously. Like, so he starts out of the gate so there's these two actions where he's talking about, and then it goes on to say, devoting time in prayer, behaving humbly, going to temple, all that sort of stuff. But he says, but these, I think, like he's got a big brain. Like, I think he's not picking random words, speaking in a particular way and thinking in a particular way. So it's this, putting these words to things and when we, like it's the power of saying things out loud, like the power, what is it? Like we can think things all kinds of days, but if you really like, and I say this in terms of disciplines, like if you really want to change your spiritual life and your prayer life, start praying to God out loud. It will change your spiritual life because you're now saying things out loud. Like we talk to God all the time, internal, that sort of stuff, but it will change us because we say things out spiritual, and then changing our thinking. And so there's, it reminds me of the old Jerry Poole story. I think it was Jerry that told it. I don't know, maybe it wasn't, but but just the old elephant story, like strapping the two elephants to the feeling state, that's Arizona. That's Frank's story. That's
okay. Frank Rose.
Frank Rose's story. Yeah. So, but the whole idea of, the idea of our thinking and our actions, because our speaking is our actions. It's like you have that model kind of laid out here in what piety is, we can think our ways and we can speak or act our ways into things, but our feeling state really is a wild elephant and needs to be brought along. I don't know if everybody knows that story, but if it's worth telling.
No, I hadn't. I'm not familiar with that story.
Do you want me to tell it?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is from one of his books, but so they're basically the way you end up, the way in, I think it's India, the way they end up training work elephants is they'll take two trained elephants and they'll kind of they'll get a wild elephant and then they'll take these two logs and they lash the wild elephant between the two working elephants, and then they just go to work. And so for a while, the working elephant will kind of, the wild elephant will kind of kick around and it will do all kinds of things and it will kind of sabotage the work for a little while. But after a while, it gets tired and it will kind of see that, when the other two working elephants, they get rewards for doing, for doing the work and for picking up the logs and whatever the work that they're doing. And so the wild elephant actually is trained by these two trained elephants. And his analogy is, he says that we can control to some degree or another what we think and how we reason. We can control to some degree or another what we do. So we have some agency over our thought and our action. Our heart is just a big wild elephant, and it doesn't want to be brought into, and it's resistant to being brought into line. But with our actions and with our feeling and with our actions and our thoughts, we can kind of sandwich in our heart to kind of bring it along into some truth. And so that was his analogy. And I kind of see that in this paragraph of like this thinking and speaking. And this is like, okay, that's this sense of how does, where do I place my mind? Where do I place my, the great kind of, how do I choose the better feeling thought thing, and then where do I put my action? And that our heart is going to be resistant in that, but understanding that it will come along, like that there's a way in which it works along. I mean, I think he links it also to kind of the AA idea of kind of fake it till you make it, kind of,
acting
as if. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
It's a great way
for the right reasons. Asking as if, because out of love to the Lord and the neighbor.
Right. And that's right. And there's the rub, right? Right. I mean, that's it. How do we facilitate that? Like, like how do our forms facilitate that? How does our ministry and our places facilitate that? Like, that's the kicker. Like, somebody give me that.
It really is the kicker. And I wanted last night. Last night was my youngest son's baptism anniversary. And in the Episcopal Church, they get a candle when they're baptized. And so we have this candle. And so every year we light the candle and we remember his baptism. And it's lovely. And my husband read the prayer out of the Episcopal prayer book, the Book of Common Prayer. And it was seeing how much it meant to them and how much it meant to my husband. And I have to admit, I was really jealous because I don't have a baptism candle. I got
right, like, where's my candle?
I was raised by hippies, and I was baptized in a Methodist church that we never went back to because of my grandmother. And I think the reality is, for so many humans right now, I'm not the only one. We don't have this consistent community of practice and relationship. And so watching it, I was like, wow, this is working. Like, this is when it works. Isn't it? But what happens when it isn't working? What happens? What are people who are, and even the other morning at church on Sunday, our organist played a Beatles music during the service. And I got so emotional because Andy, you know this, the Portland New Church where I grew up, we sang Beatles songs.
That's the hymnals, man. Like, yeah.
That was my, formative pious
I get it.
experience.
That's your formative.
And now
part,
I'm
yeah.
in this very traditional setting that's very different. I feel like so many of us are having to navigate really different worlds, different practices, and it's like this sea of opportunity and possibility, which is lovely. But also a lot of discontinuity, between community and it's messy. It's messy. And I think it's necessary. I mean, I certainly wouldn't prefer that the whole world was all one religion and we just all did the thing. Like that's when it becomes very empty.
Mm.
But how do we navigate the diverse experiences that people are having? And I mean, to me, it feels like there's a real, it is what Swedenborg was sort of talking about in terms of that we're coming into an era of a new church where our piety needs to be much more personal and much more connected to our life and our everyday life. So there's a gift that can come, but I feel like we're in a real time of disruption between these two realities of having it be laid out and then having so much possibility of different ways of being pious even.
Yeah, right. And it's, it's always, oh, go ahead, Karen. Sorry.
No, I can hold it. You go.
Oh, okay. I mean, this has just been such a long, this has been such a long conversation within our tradition in the sense of, what are the forms of the new church really look like, and I'm more and more though, coming back to really believing they really, that it's not about reinventing the wheel. It's about actually steering the car someplace meaningful, and that the wheel actually, the forms are, because there's a couple of things that are happening, and this is from, can't remember, maybe it's Barna Research or Pew, I think this is from Pew, but they're talking about kind of the idea of denominationalism as a whole is pretty much dying in America, and that what you're getting is a landscape and a seascape of non-denominational churches. Like that's really what 60% of the churches in America are and are going to be in, and it's going to, so this is the movement of the church, which kind of terrifies me because they have they're the Dory of, the fish from Finding Nemo of church.
Yeah.
They have they're like, just keep swimming. They're just so in the present, like have no sense of, and have this, and so and that's just been the movement, which actually, if you look at kind of the conversations I think we've had within the tradition about like, what does the new church look like in terms of, is it this devolution of form? Is it this increase of form? Is it the, like, certainly the devolution of form, like the non-denominational movement and the hippies would have a lot in common, because it really is about kind of the, but you get into, but what you find in that, when you scratch that a little bit, you find actually that, that pastor who's just kind of hanging out in his skinny jeans, wearing his flannel, kind of talking from his Bible, in this kind of authentic way, every single thing that guy is wearing has been marketed and tested and marketed. Like he's wearing the right color skinny jeans to appeal to people. He's wearing the right brand of flannel. Like there is a whole lot of you look at you kind of peel the tape back on kind of the, any of the, not even megachurch phenomenon, just kind of large churches in America. All of that is really thought through. Like it's not the authenticity that it kind of presents in a way. So anyway, I say all of that to kind of come back to this notion of what does it look like? And I'm actually becoming, and this is maybe just me getting old and turning into a crotchety old fart, is just the idea of like, I really believe in the traditional forms, like what you said, Sage, this notion of, your kids lighting a candle for their, and everybody there was having an experience with it. Like you were having an experience, everybody there, it was meaningful, like to everybody present. And that, and again, it's less, and I think, I think what this reading tells us though is forms are important.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? They matter. And just, guitars and skinny jeans, like, don't get it done because they're not formed, and there's all kinds of other, and it's not to pick on that. It's not to say like, oh, that's right and this is wrong. It's just to say that, I don't know. I just, goes back to where I started of that, like, are these forms kind of like a lot of the conversations or even a lot of the teaching and the preaching I hear out of it are really are kind of God conversations. They're really about like, well, Jesus will love you if you do all the right things, or, you'll be in the kingdom if you don't, or, like you're, like these are the,
Get it right or you're toast.
yeah. And, those, like what, I just so appreciate your story because it's so on point, Sage, about like, that's a from God experience.
Mhm.
Like and it was the tradition and the vessel that created the from God experience.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like or not created it, created the container for it. That's what I mean.
Yeah.
That's what I'm
Well,
saying.
and I think for me, it's that there was a community, it's not
Right,
that
exactly.
just
Yeah.
words said
Yeah,
in
yeah.
isolation. It's words said with love, but and that church is dwindling too, though. So they're still, they're still facing the reality of this
Right.
moment in history. I think my take on all of this is that one of my takes, I have many takes, but one of it is just that if it's from God, if the point of piety is to be acting from God, as you put it, Andy, and of living from this inner holiness, I think the forms are important, but I think the forms can be very diverse. And so maybe some of the forms are skinny jeans, they can be Beatles songs, they can be,
Oh, totally. Yeah.
liturgy in a sanctuary, I was very struck, and I don't know why I didn't notice this the first time I read this book, but the new heaven that forms before the new earth comes includes Christians and non-Christians. So conceivably, the new church is not totally dependent on a particular religious identity, but it's about this desire to live by the best we know, and through that desire, a desire to create forms of living in community in ways that are loving, in ways that are worship, in ways that are good. And I think there's probably this is sort of my thing lately, especially because I am in a smaller community and there's not a lot of people gathering, and it's sort of like, this is lovely that we're doing this, and there's a lot of other lovely things we also could be doing. Mm-hmm. So it's like to not prioritize one form over the other feels like what he is getting at in here, that it has to come out of this inner experience of love. And I know that makes it very complicated because if we're all having different experiences and called to different
inevitably
things.
Right, inevitably.
Mm-hmm.
You guys have more experience with George than I, because you guys did the whole structured thing. Instruction. I took several classes from him right at the end of his life. The online things that CSS was offering free, they were really fun. And he often would mention, and I'm wondering if he did this years ago, he would mention the importance of beauty in worship. It had apparently become extremely important to him. And in more than one class, on more than one day, he would again talk about the importance of the beauty of holiness.
That's a journey for him, because in my age, I never heard him talk about beauty that much. Yeah.
He really softened in his older years. I feel like beauty and goodness. And he would often say, the only reason I ever said anything wise is because of something good that God put in me.
Yeah, right.
He really came to that awareness.
That's wild, because so we do an organ concert here once a month, and we kind of bring in organists, and our organist does it and stuff. And I kind of start the introduction to it with the same quote every month. And they probably hate it at this point, but I don't care. But it is Dostoevsky, which says, beauty will save the world. And I've come to believe that is actually the quote for this age, is that, and maybe that's what this is. Maybe that's the secret sauce linky thing between that community piece and that tradition piece and then all that. Is it beautiful? Like, is it really legitimately beautiful? And can we put and if in a way that we don't even have to intellectually understand it, but we there's something in us that resonates with it quite literally, and that I, part of that whole starting that series was this idea of we're going to bring beauty into this world because that's what the world needs right now is actually the beautiful. And that maybe that's part of what that's part of the linking of community and the forms and all of that is around, because certainly what you describe in your family and that ritual, like, my gosh, I just get all like, ooh, that's beautiful that you should do that, for your child.
And beauty, I think Helen Keller has a quote about beauty that we only can perceive beauty with love. So really at the heart of beauty.
Perfect. Yeah.
Is love, feeling love for the experience. I mean, we can listen to beautiful music and not feel love and stay on our phones.
Yeah.
We can listen to, I get verklempt watching, teenage high school marching bands, and maybe they're not playing on cue, but it's beautiful and it's loving.
Right.
So it does ultimately come down to that essence of love and maybe the essence of, there's not one right answer on how to worship. So, but are the forms of piety that you are participating in, are they creating an atmosphere of love and of beauty and of charity and compassion? And certainly we have many examples throughout history and in our present moment of pious actions that are not loving, that are harmful and violent. And that's something that is that to me is the thing that's in many ways Swedenborg was writing about, to kind of caution us against and to challenge us to think about how to create forms that foster love and how to listen to what those forms might be, the diversity of them.
Yeah. And to go back to what you had said before, to say the new heaven that's getting prepared, that is preparing the new earth, has within it a whole bunch of forms. And that, but I think that the part of that is we can only be accountable for ours. Like we can only give expression to ours, and that we can certainly appreciate and see all the others, but there's an expression that you're called to bring in your setting, I'm called to bring in mine, that Karen, you're called to bring into your life, every one of us, gosh, I can't think of his name, but one of the kind of the historian guys of Christianity says, every movement in Christianity that we see is really a devolution of the church, in meaning that it goes to a smaller form, which, follows Swedenborg really well when he says that the church is in its full, in the church in its smallest form is the individual, that's, so there's this way in which we do have to be accountable for, or not accountable, that's the wrong word, but we're invited to the expression of our beauty, our piety, in a way that is that kind of has the beautiful, that kind of brings forth the beautiful, and then and really I think community kind of clicks off of that, like community, like that resonant, life, vivification vivifies, life brings life, and there's ways that there's beauty in that.
Yeah. Well, and if we're gathering around our love and our beauty, then we hopefully we find others who share our way of being or our preferences. I think a lot about the vision of the new church in relationship and in contrast to kind of fascism, or this is the one way that we're going to do it and we're all going to conform. That's so often what we humans tend to gravitate towards. We want to conform, we want to be good, we want to be the good shiny boy, and we think some authority is going to give us that sense. And yet the invitation of the new church is to see that higher authority as never embodied in one particular person, but to recognize that higher reality within our own selves, and to let us all be distinguishably one, to let there really be this, not white walls, not abandoning all of the traditions, not saying, okay, we can't have crosses and we can't have, other symbols because we have to respect differences, but to have all of to let every story, every symbol of the divine that has spoken to people continue to speak, and finding ways to be in relationship with each other with our differences. That to me is like the primary work of this moment, is how to be. And I wonder, I don't know about the purpose of the Swedenborgian church and all of that. Sometimes I think George wrote about this actually in his Sorting Things Out. One of the essays is about, maybe we're here to serve other churches, maybe we're here to serve, as we have been throughout, in terms of helping with the World Parliament of Religions. Maybe there's a way in which we're not meant to be another identity on the scene who's specific and formed, but instead something a little bit more porous and spacious. I don't know, but I think that's part of the work that's necessary in the world, whether that has to be the work of the whole denomination or just part of the work that I know it's part of the work I feel called to.
Yeah. I just think, and I just go back to thinking it's just wildly personal and wildly trapped in our own setting, and maybe this is just my kind of newfound congregationalism kind of coming out, but it's this, like, this, to make the claim, that here at 282 Rock Street, Fall River, the church is complete. The fullness of the church is complete right here with our, group of souls that come to worship and have covenanted together, and when a new soul shows up, it is more complete. But it is that we're not looking to an authority outside of it. We're not looking to a thing outside of it. We truly are the church in its totality right here and right now, as the, and in that really like beautiful sorting things out, that beautiful holographic way that George would talk about of the body of Christ, of the grand man. Like, that actually works really nicely. We actually are complete. That's not a metaphor. That is an actual reality, that we can actually be that, and that the church down the street, they can be that too. Like they can be complete in that too. But to really claim that as a, like as the kind of the Pilgrims do, as a theological tenet of saying this, we are the body of Christ, or with Christ at its head, at the the church is its body, and in its fullness right here and right now, like. There's something a lot that there's, that's a very new church expression to me. Like, that I can, like it's something I can really, and I talk about it a lot here with my folks about, like, because there's the inevitable, like, oh, what they doing up the street? What do they do? Like, their parking lot's full. Like, 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 are you in covenant with them? No, we're in covenant with each other. Like, we love them. Like, that's not, but we're here to be the church. Like, and it's, our first task is to be the church. And I have to say it almost once a month at least. Like, our task is to be the church. It's not like that's our job. And when we're doing that, like, and so, I think there's a lot to this in this piety conversation around that, about what does that look like then to come to church? What does that look like then to, we're going to go down and make a meal for the homeless this afternoon? What does that mean for these expressions that we're going to give?
I think that's beautiful. I think that's so, and it speaks to me in terms of some of the struggle I've had in my ministry of, I think anytime you are feeling like you're not yet the church, that will be the church one day.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Right.
Like that's
no better recipe for suffering than that.
That's one of the real jobs that's been done on us, isn't it? Like that one day, the great by and by will be the church. But right now we're just, when the new church comes, then we'll be the church. Now we're just holding on, no, we're pretty much it now.
We are it now. And in whatever state we're in, we are it now.
Absolutely. Right.
And it feels like there is in this chapter, there's a emphasis, there's a not discounting of piety, but a putting it in its right place. I think there is a what happens when a form is on its way out?
Yeah.
Forms have gone by the wayside. Many
sure.
churches have evolved. I'm sure your church is not the same church it was 50 years ago. Every community evolves over time and things change. And as you said, it becomes more perfect when a new person enters in, and what are they bringing? And what is the beauty they bring that wants to be added? I feel like that's an important element of how our practices change, and one that we can get stuck, that if that change is not allowed, or if that, there can be a
Oh, gosh.
stagnation that can occur.
We've all seen it in our lifetimes. We've seen that come and go, that sort of thing happen.
Yeah. And
I will say, I mean, all that's spot on. And though, is that I think there's a way in which we're, I mean, our forms are breaking down everywhere. Every form we have, whether it's, education, medical, political, like all the forms around us are breaking down. And so there's this way, like, and whether we, kind of, let go of old forms, pick up new forms, however that works. But I think that there is a criticality to having some form these days when we look at a world in which there's forms breaking down, of being able to say, like, okay, this is how we do it. This is how we're going to do it, and it's fun to have conversations around in intentional ways, like we're in a conversation about whether we're going to go back to having offering plates, or we're going to have the offering box, as we've been, the church has kept both traditions over time for a while, and so we're, there's this different conversation about, well, what does it mean for us? What does it look like? How does it feel? What gets us more money? What, like there's all these different kind of competing things in it, but it's really kind of fun to have a conversation about form, and about what does this form mean, and how, well, we've always done this, or are we going to do this? And to not, it doesn't have to be a, die on this hill kind of thing, but it can actually be done with some, some compassion and some charity. So, because, and I think it's really interesting to kind of watch it play out in the church, because there's this way, because of the way we're engaging in all the other forms in our world are just like, kind of look like a demolition zone in a lot of ways. So
I think my wondering though is there a way, because I think talking about forms changing death is not the worst thing. It's necessary. Death and life are both equally necessary. And certainly in my time as a hospice chaplain, death can be very beautiful. And so as forms do change, I just wonder why we have to get so upset about it. Like, isn't there a possible way of having a form where that caring is really happening, where that connection is really happening, where we are together on that essential level. And so then we can really kind of look around with clear eyes at what is happening, and grieve together and imagine together. Like that's my dream of what the new church could be, is just to be more really willing to be honest. And I think that's very much in here, is like faith is about acknowledging the truth, like the actual lived experience that we're having. And sometimes I worry that our forms and our ideas about things, and even our pious practices, kind of, we get so attached to them that we're missing each other.
Yeah,
we're missing ourselves.
I see where you're going. Yeah.
Stan and I go to a Methodist church because we are the chapel. Wayfarer's Chapel is probably the closest one. We live in Bishop, California, in the middle of nowhere, and of course the Methodist church is going through a schism. And so what you guys are saying is helpful to me, because in spite of all of that devolution that's happening within the UMC, we still are the church at 205 North Fowler, Bishop, California.
Yeah.
Still doing the stuff, still doing the soup kitchens, and we have a shower ministry for the unhoused, for crying out loud, which is
That's
very
great.
cool.
That is very
Yeah.
cool.
We're still doing all that stuff.
We're
Right.
still people, human living people,
Yeah.
being the divine in the world.
Yeah.
And, I think when we can do that, we can weather a lot of change. We can weather a lot of, and maybe we can have these conversations you're suggesting, Andy, and it can be fun. And it
Yeah,
can be
right.
fun
And that's kind of what
when
I'm
we're-
saying. Yeah, when it's held covenantally in that, to kind of use the congregational language again, it's held kind of in covenant, understanding that no matter where we end up on this, there's something larger that binds us together. There's the common cup, which we'll all come to, that binds us together. And so we can talk about these things and we can discuss them and we can maybe get our way, maybe not get our way, but there, we don't have to we don't, but they're not the core of our identity, or they're not the core of what's going to have our engagement here be or not be, there's
Yes.
something larger that contains that.
Yeah. And every community, just like every organ in our body or every cell, goes through stages. And so there are probably some times in a community's life where you can make it through a change, and then other times when it's harder or there's a bigger change that's required. And there's so many people on this planet. There's so many people on this planet with so many, different experiences of God, of holy, of themselves. And I think that's the piece that I'm sort of sitting with, is as certain societies kind of really do dwindle, or those practices don't become resonant with the larger world, what does it look like to make space and to affirm these deeper truths in ways that are accessible and inspiring to other people like me that didn't grow up in a church, that don't have certain language for God, but are suffering in this world of change, without something to hold on to. It feels like this great opportunity and great disaster right now in the world.
Boy, there was I mean, I just to reflect about the Camino for just a second, is that, like, man, there were a whole lot of people from all over the planet, but often having a very similar experience.
Mhm.
That Camino really, like, everybody's feet hurt, like everybody's shoulders were stiff, like everybody was hot and sweaty, and like there's there, and and I think the physical reality of that was also mirrored as spiritual reality of that people were being stripped down. There's ways in which they're like you're some of that because that's, I mean, the Camino is a form. That's what it is. It's a form. You go there, you submit yourself to the form, you walk the hundreds of miles, whatever they are, and you do that in the context, like you're talking about, of literally millions of people that have done it before.
Mhm.
This year, 450,000 people walked the Camino.
Holy cow.
Like you're talking about, came into, that's about how many Compostelas they gave out with a little certificate that you get when you complete it. So, yeah, so we're talking about this incredibly universal experience in some ways too. So because that always intrigues me, like what you're saying, like there's so many people and they're so different and they're all doing different things and they talk different and they eat different stuff and they're like, it's so different. And at the same time, like I'm sitting there talking to the Chinese girl next to me, or whatever, and just that, and it wasn't just her, like it was literally her grandmother, her mom and her that came from China to walk the Camino. Like, I'm like, as Chinese Catholics, like, I mean, like, what the hell? Like, okay, wait a minute. Like, you could not be any different than me. Like, you people, you could not, and yet here we are, like on the road together, having an experience, and your little, your little kind of, pink unicorn hanging off your knapsack, like whatever. Like, I mean, it's all of these incredibly human and connective pieces of that too. So,
well, exactly. And these forms that have been given us by our ancestors, who they have been made holy over time, our gifts, you know, and there's this woman on Facebook or on TikTok or whatever that I follow. Who's an Orthodox Jew, and she shares about her life, and she's fabulous. And it's so interesting to see the things that she does. And I can see in her life, I mean, I don't know her, who knows, but feel like what a gift to just, this is what I do. This is my life. These are the practices I participate in. This is what it means. Like, it's really is this making sacred, making holy all of life. And I think watching her, I'm realizing like that's all of us are really called to do that. All of us are called to make all of our lives sacred, and that's or to recognize the sacredness in all of our lives. And I think in part because at this moment in history, there's so much media, so much, you know, so many possible ways of living that many of us feel like I can't even, I'm not even really surviving in life because it's so overwhelming. So the idea of making it sacred feels like, how will I ever choose? And I feel like that's the work, like that's the call, is like realize God is living in us, to honor it and to make sacred whatever may be playing out in my life at this moment. And to realize we have the power to choose how we are living and how we are making sacred. And I feel like I want the church to be a place where we're empowered to do that together with our diversity, you know, in our diversity, in our
moment to moment, we have the freedom to do that. And it's incredibly powerful and so damn easy to forget. You know, I hope we're evolving to a point where we remember it more often. And people like you, the person you talked about, Sage, who have got these rituals, you know, that they do it must be very, at least the potential is there for that to be very powerfully healing.
To just know who you are and what's important to you and how to be that person. I feel like that's what we all need to discover that. I don't know that we all have to become Orthodox Jews, but I think we all need to discover that.
Right. Yeah.
And we need to claim it as ours, as our choice, as our freedom. You know, that we're called to be free and to not see ourselves as pulled and pushed by the wings of the life around us, but to be owning our choices as ours through God, you know, as in this mysterious interplay of acting as if it's of ourselves, but actually through God's love, and to really embrace the messy lives that most of us probably do lead, because we're not all Orthodox Jews. So we're involved in all kinds of things, and we sometimes go to church, and we, you know, I do feel like there is the possibility of, if you can embrace it all, if you can accept it all as it is, if you can honor that God is in whatever's happening now, and this is individually, and then also as a church, as a community, to say, okay, this is the landscape. Now, what do I freely choose next? What's my next choice? What's my next move within this all? And how can that next move be sacred, that next step? Not to jump to some imagined perfection, but to be responsive to the life that's actually living in me, that I believe is God in us, inspiring us to the next thing. That's how I try to meet my days. I don't necessarily know how to do that collectively yet, but I would like to see the church be a place where and you mentioned reminding. I often think of that as that's the purpose for being church, is so we can remind each other.
Do this in remembrance of me, you know? I mean, it's the heart of what we're called to do. It's like, you know, it's not about an intellectual exercise of like, oh yeah, I I left the coffee pot on. It's that like, oh, I am reconnected. I am relinked. I am up like a, you know, like a hand sewn back onto a body. We're reconnected to the thing, you know, like that. Yeah. Like it is I mean, there's plenty of people in the world who make the case that that's our core function, is remembering. In that,
and all our chapels and our beautiful sacred spaces are meant to elicit that sense. Oh, wow. Okay. And yet sadly, because of how it's been lived out for many people, those sacred spaces bring out feelings of shame or feelings of unworthiness, and so there's just, we're in the mix. Heaven and hell are very closely in combat with one another.
Yeah.
And so to help people to see that to be reminded of what the more essential meaning is, even if the more essential meaning of Jesus's life that's been so perverted in so much of church history, it's always coming back to that. Well, we have 5 more minutes. I wondered if we want to stop, we want to end with, I just wonder if either of you are willing to share kind of something in your journey, a pietist act, an act of worship or prayer that maybe has always been with you, or that has come to you later in life, or something that has become a meaningful connection point between, or helped you as a reminder. If there's 1 or 2 things that either of you would want to share.
Well, lighting a candle. I keep prayer candles, those big, that'll go on for days.
Mhm.
And I dig one out and light it if there's something in particular on my heart.
Mm, lovely.
Candles are powerful. People love candles. I remember a friend of mine gave me a candle to light while she was in labor, and it is the perfect symbol of love and wisdom. And they're just beautiful.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Mm.
That's actually Swedenborg's vision of the ministry, because he says that the ministers, priests are the candles on the altar of the Lord that consume them, that are consumed by holy flame, and by in the work that they do. Like I thought it was a beautiful image, but an awful one all at the same time.
They're consumed by
I'm
flame.
like, I
That
don't
sounds
like it. I don't
appropriate.
like this consumed part. Like, but yeah. Yeah.
Hopefully there's
yeah.
lots of oil. It's a
Yeah,
very
right. Exactly.
Yes,
So
let's
I was
not.
like, there's got to be something ameliorating in there, but yeah.
Oh,
So for me, yeah,
that's
there's
beautiful.
always been lots of them. I mean, over the year, like over time, but like right now, I'm getting a ton of traction out of kind of the Orthodox Jesus prayer of, Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner.
Mhm.
Which it's really been like, particularly on the Camino, it was really present for me. Like it was always on my lips and a lot of the time. And then it's really, I kind of try and start the day with it and kind of end the day with it. And it's really because, and it's all, and just to kind of close with, there were a couple other things I wanted to get into here, but I know we're on time, but this quote from, the Arcana selections at the end of this part, where he talks about, and he quotes it like he puts it like 5 different places in the Arcana, and he says that people believe that the Lord desires worship for the sake of glory, but they who thus believe know not what divine glory is, nor that it consists of the salvation of human race, but people have, when he attributes nothing to himself, and when he removes his proprium by humiliation, because the divine is then able to flow in. And that phrase of, removes his proprium by humiliation, I'm like, go, like there, we talk, like this whole conversation has been a lot about forms breaking down and all that sort of stuff. And like, there's senses of proprium in that are being removed from us. And I feel very much, in this part of life and that sort of thing, it's really about, that's why this Jesus prayer for me has been really powerful, of like, it's like, anything, that anything that is good that's coming through me isn't from me, it really is from the Lord. And I seeing that more and more clearly. And that prayer recently has been helping me just more with that, kind of just stay grounded in that reality of like, this isn't divine punishment. It's not beating me up. Like, I'm not a bad boy. This is really the removing of the heart of stone and the placing of the heart of flesh that God's trying to do with me. And to really, the more I can relax into that process, the better we'll all be,
And you don't really have a choice.
Right, exactly.
Like the process is unfolding.
You can go easy, you can go hard, but you're gonna go. Like,
but you're gonna go one way or another. That's beautiful. Well, and with this piety conversation, it does feel like the more we are humiliated, the more we are realizing that this life is God's. Sometimes if we're not attached to these forms, if we don't think those are it, if we can get released from it, then we can have all the forms we want. You know, we can
Right.
enjoy the forms with a humble attitude about what's really important. So thank
Which
you.
I think
That's
is kind of the beauty of you following your Orthodox friend there. Like, I mean, there's a way in which you're not going to be an Orthodox Jew, but at the same time, you can look at her forms and look at that expression and say the beauty and the wonder, and because it
well,
does come
exactly.
in
Once we
place.
all have been humiliated, then
Right,
we can
yeah,
appreciate each
exactly.
other.
Like, you're like, oh, look, yeah,
Then
right.
we can appreciate and see the beauty and all of the different jewels in the wall of the holy city.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you guys so much. I'd say this is one of my forms, honestly. My pietist forms is New Jerusalem discussion group. And, some other groups I've started of just being with others and listening. I really feel like we are all kind of the same substance and our journeys are very similar. So I'm really interested in that deep sharing. And I feel like Jew or Muslim or Christian or Swedenborgian, if we can all just talk about how we're experiencing life in this moment, we will find this essential oneness in our midst. And every time I touch that to me is hugely nurturing to my spiritual life and my confidence in the future. So I guess I'll keep doing that. So thank you guys so much for joining, and everybody
Thank you.
online, Ralph and Robin, and we'll be back next week with, I forget. We'll look. I'll submit something. I think it's taking credit, what it means to take credit for our lives. So thanks, Karen and Andy, and
Thank you.
next time.